Hello everyone, I'm Nizzahon, here for the Aether Hub, bringing you another video chronicling a returning mechanic in Magic. I did the same for cycling and split cards in Amonkhet, and now with Ixalan we have the return of double-faced cards. Double-faced cards in the keyword action Transform were officially announced as deciduous mechanics with the reveal of Ixalan, which means it is going to show up from time to time, but not in every set like evergreen mechanics. In this video, I'm going to talk about the various iterations of double-faced cards and talk about what was unique about them each time we saw them, while also talking about the standout double-faced cards from the game's history. Double-faced cards originally debuted in Innistrad in 2011, an expansion set on the eponymous plane, and this is a plane that is something of an homage to Gothic horror. This set includes creatures like Vampires and Werewolves, creatures known for their ability to transform into things, and Wizards decided to do something that was pretty innovative at the time. Make cards with two faces, one on each side, so that both forms of a creature could be represented by a single card. This is an amazing flavor win and also allows for fun gameplay, something that has resulted in double-faced cards being one of the most popular mechanics in the game. However, this creates something of a logistic nightmare as far as printing cards goes, as only double-faced cards can be printed on a single sheet, so there was no point in going small with the mechanic. Instead, they introduced a ton of creatures who could transform. You could only cast a card with the side that had a mana cost, but something could happen that would lead to it transforming. In Innistrad, all but one of the double-faced cards were creatures, and the vast majority of them were werewolves. Werewolves could all transform in the same way. Like Mayor of Avabruck here, if a player ever did not cast a spell during their turn, it would transform, with Mayor of Avabruck transforming into Halpak Alpha, which is what was on the other side of the card. All werewolves could all be turned back into their human form the same way too. A player could cast 2 spells in a turn and the werewolf would turn into its usually less frightening form. While werewolves are consistent in how they transform, other cards from Innistrad could transform in a variety of ways. The double-faced card that has had the biggest impact on Magic also appeared in the very first set with double-faced cards in Innistrad. And it wasn't a werewolf, instead it was a human wizard called Delver of Secrets, who, based on the art, is interested in doing research on insects. The Delver transforms if, at the beginning of your upkeep, the top card of your library is an instant or sorcery, and when it does, it becomes a 3/2 with flying. This card is meant to be an homage to stories of mad scientists who take things a little bit too far and result in turning themselves into a monster. Delver of Secrets is pretty much a 1-mana 3/2 flyer in the majority of the constructed decks that have played it, and that is an insanely powerful card. So powerful that there have been Tier 1 decks in every single format it has ever been legal in named after it, including Standard, Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, and even Pauper. Hard to argue that any double-faced card has done more in the game than Delver. Innistrad also gave us one card that was not a creature that could transform. Instead, it is a Planeswalker who transforms, who also had a pretty huge impact on the game, and that is Garruk Relentless. Just the Relentless half of the card is a very good Planeswalker. He can pump out wolf tokens or do damage to creatures. However, if his loyalty ever dips below 3, he transforms into Garruk the Veil Curse, which represents Garruk after being cursed by the Chain Veil. This side is also quite powerful, pumping out smaller wolves, but they have Death Touch now. He can also use a graveyard-powered Overrun effect and act as a creature tutor. Garruk saw a ton of play in Standard and Modern, and while he's fallen out of favor in Modern lately, it seems like he could make an appearance there again someday. The second set in Innistrad block, Dark Ascension, gave us more double-faced cards, bringing us more werewolves, including the best werewolf ever printed, and I don't think there's really an argument here, and that is Huntmaster of the Fells. Like its predecessors, it transformed and no spells were cast from human to werewolf, and in this case that means into Ravager of the Fells, and from werewolf to human when 2 spells were cast in a turn. Unlike the other werewolves though, Huntmaster did something every time it transformed, doesn't matter which way. When it became a human, you got 2 life and a wolf token. When it became a werewolf, it shocked a creature and a player. Huntmaster was one of the most played cards in the Standard of his time, showing up in tons of aggro decks. He's also seen play in Modern too, primarily in Jund. Dark Ascension also broke new ground for double-faced cards, being the first set to make artifacts that could transform. One example of this is Elbrus the Binding Blade, which starts out as a crazily costed equipment that hardly gives any bonus to your creature, but there's a reason for that. If your creature hits your opponent, Elbrus transforms into Withengar Unbound, who is a massive 13/13 with a slew of keyword abilities. This made Elbrus the Binding Blade the first card to change its type when it transforms. While this card never really saw competitive play, it is another great example of the flavor that double-faced cards can give you. A seemingly unimportant blade that doesn't seem very good has a demon trapped inside of it, and the game gives you a way to make it come out. The final set in Innistrad block, Avacyn Restored, did not have any double-faced cards. This made sense flavor-wise, since the return of Avacyn put an end to all the crazy transformations that the double-faced cards represented. it would be a while before double-faced cards returned to the game, in large part because of the logistical problems printing them created, and because Wizards wanted to have a good reason, flavor-wise, to bring them back. Eventually, Wizards found a great place for double-faced cards to make their return, and this was in Magic Origins, 4 years since they'd last printed double-faced cards. The core of this set's lore focused on how 5 of Magic's Planeswalkers became Planeswalkers. This included Jace, Chandra, Gideon, Liliana, and Nissa. Wizards came up with the idea to represent these Planeswalkers as double-faced cards. On the front, they are all creatures, representing who they were before their spark ignited and they became Planeswalkers. But if you fulfill a requirement, they transform into their Planeswalker selves. So, like Elbrus, the Binding Blade, these double-faced cards change card types when they transformed from creature to Planeswalker. All 5 of the Planeswalkers in this cycle saw some degree of competitive play, but the undisputed king of the cycle is Jace, Vryn's Prodigy. Jace is actually an interesting card to talk about because he was criminally underrated by people in the community when he was spoiled, including myself, with some saying he was even the worst of the cycle, and that might also have included me, but who knows. I'm not really sure what led us down this path, because this Jace is very good. A 2-mana 0/2 that can loot is already something that Control decks would be interested in, but in a format that was loaded with cycling lands and some cantrips, Jace could transform incredibly quickly into Jace Telepath Unbound. He started with high loyalty after his transformation too, and keep in mind he only paid 2 mana for this Planeswalker, and while his +1 is a nice way of stalling, the -3 is what made Jace really good, because he allowed you to cast instants and sorceries out of your graveyard. He quickly found homes in Control decks in Standard, and was one of the most dominant cards in the format. After fetch lands rotated out, he saw a little bit less play, but he also sees some play in modern Control decks, sometimes along Delver of Secrets actually, and he has even recently started seeing play in vintage Monastery Mentor decks. Unfortunately for Jace, the Mentor was just restricted in that format, but I think Jace has the power to stick around somewhere in Vintage. This time around, Wizards didn't take long to give us more double-faced cards, as just a year later, we returned to Innistrad with Shadows over Innistrad, and since they were returning to the plane where double-faced cards originated, and it was a popular mechanic, they brought it back. This meant the return of werewolves, who still transformed the same way. Of all the werewolves in Shadows over Innistrad, Duskwatch Recruiter has stood out as the most powerful, with the ability to help you draw creatures and a reasonable 2/2 body, plus a werewolf side that allows you to cast creatures more quickly. He was tailor-made for aggro decks, especially those running Collected Company. The Recruiter not only saw a lot of play in standard Collected Company decks, but he's made the transition to modern Collected Company decks as well and continues to see play there. Wizards also broke new ground with double-faced cards, giving us the first land that could transform with Westvale Abbey. This land can pump out creature tokens, and when you have enough guys in play, you can pay 5 and sacrifice 5 guys to transform it into the frightening Ormondal Profane Prince. This card represents the dwelling place of the Skurzdag cult, who used to worship Griselbrand, and in their attempt to make contact with another demon, they found Ormondal. Unlike the last card that transformed into a massive demon, that is Elbrus, the Binding Blade, Westvale Abbey has had a big impact on competitive play. The opportunity cost of playing this is very low, since it's a land and can produce mana, or just make creature tokens until you can transform it into a win condition. Indestructibility makes it difficult to deal with Ormondal, unlike his predecessor, and lifelink is enough to put you out of range of your opponent's attack. Most decks that run a lot of creatures have played this in Standard, and it's seen a little bit of play in Modern too, something that I think will continue. This is just a very powerful land, and it happens to be one that is double-faced. Wizards also introduced the first card that is not a permanent that could transform in Startled Awake. Instead, Startled Awake begins as a sorcery that mills your opponent 13 cards, but you pay 5 while it is in your graveyard to put it into play transformed, and it transforms into a creature, Persistent Nightmare when you do. This is another super flavorful use of double-faced cards, as it is meant to represent a recurring nightmare or a recurring spirit that haunts you every night, and milling your opponent over and over again is a good way to represent that. The last card to talk about in Shadows over Innistrad is an interesting one. It is a new representation of Archangel Avacyn, who is a ridiculously powerful card. This is the kind of card that when it was spoiled, everyone was like, yeah, that's going to see a lot of play and cost about $30, and, well, it did. In fact, I think it was more than $30 at some point. A 5-mana 4/4 with Flying, Flash, and Vigilance, and when it enters the battlefield, gives all your guys indestructible, is ridiculous. But there's something a little strange here. Remember, I told you last time Avacyn returned, it took away the ability of creatures to transform. Well, things have changed on the plane, and now Avacyn can transform herself. When a non-angel creature you control dies, she transforms into Avacyn the Purifier. So Avacyn has become much darker in Innistrad since we left, and she's interested in getting rid of people now instead of protecting them because she views them as unpure in large part. And when she transforms, she's a 6/5 that nukes most of the board, and that is a very powerful effect. Avacyn was sort of our first hint that things weren't as they should be on the plane of Innistrad. There were a lot of other hints as well in Shadows over Innistrad, but we're going to see in Eldritch Moon how messed up things were. In Eldritch Moon, it was revealed that the influence of Emrakul is what had made everything so screwed up on the plane, and the transform mechanic in Eldritch Moon no longer represented gothic horror-esque transformations. Instead, it was representative of Emrakul transforming the residents of Innistrad into part Eldrazi monsters, and all the cards that can transform and are double-faced in this set are Eldrazi when they transform. For the first time, we were given double-faced cards that did not use the keyword action transform, though. Instead, they used the word meld. These cards each have half of a card on the reverse side. For example, Gisela the Broken Blade and Bruna the Fading Light, two more angels that help protect the plane in the original Innistrad, became so corrupted by Emrakul that if you had both in play at once, they could fuse, well, meld I guess is the technical term, into Brazella, Voice of Nightmares, an Eldrazi angel. How's that for a weird creature type? All of the other creatures who transform or meld in Eldritch Moon are Eldrazi when they do so. That does it for this look back at the other times we've seen double-faced cards. I'm looking forward to seeing more of what the double-faced cards in Ixalan will do, flavor-wise and gameplay-wise. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it for others to enjoy it as well. Thanks for watching.